March 24th from 5:15 to 6 to discuss and consider a presentation given by the Mount Juliet Public Works on their road safety action plan. All right, let's start off. Is there anyone here to make citizen comments? This will be your only opportunity to make comments during this workshop. All right, let the record show that there were no citizens for citizen comments. So, Mr. White, were you asking for the floor? It is yours.
All right. Thank you guys for coming a little early to listen to what we got today. Most of y'all are familiar with the grant we were awarded last year through the Federal Highway Administration. It's called Safe Streets for All program. Art wasn't here at the time, but basically the purpose of the grant is to develop a safety action plan for our city. And then once we have a plan, then we can go after additional federal funds to start implementing some of the projects that we're recommending in the plan. So we hired Kimley Horn last year to be the consultant on this project. And I'll introduce Leo. He's with Kimley Horn, and I'll turn it over to him.
Awesome. Well, good evening. I appreciate the time to give us an opportunity to present on the work that we've been doing. Like Matthew mentioned, this is a project that is being funded through the Safe Street for All program. It's a federal program, part of the bipartisan bill, the infrastructure bill that was passed 2-3 years ago now. So a little bit on the details on the program is $5 billion that have been allocated to be spent in 5 years. So we're now cycle 3, completing cycle 3. So there's a expectation that in a few weeks, actually, the next cycle for projects and project implementation will come out. So our goal is to have the action plan document, which is the one that we're going to be presenting today, adopted so the city could qualify for implementation funding. The program is based on the U.S. DOT National Roadway Safety Strategy, which is built from the safe system approach that I'll talk a little bit in detail in a little bit. And then there are, within the $5 billion that were allocated, there's 2 types of funding. One is for action plans and demonstrations, which is the one that the city was awarded that was used for the action plan, and the next one is implementation. So that's how the program works. The action plan specifically has 8 components that are required in order to qualify or satisfy the program itself. And then as shown on the screen, we, as part of the process so far, we completed 6 of the 8. One, it needs participation from the leadership, from you all, and that's why we want to give you a presentation on the plan and the commitments that are required for the city as part of the plan. So we'll go into that detail a little bit. And then the last one is the evaluation and transparency. There is a requirement for the plan to be posted online so the public can see the recommendations that come from the plan, and also that there's a method for the city to demonstrate progress towards the goal and the implementation of the actions that are in the plan itself. So obviously that will be completed after the plan is adopted, as the city posts the plan online and so forth. So I'm going to go through some of the components. The leadership commitment we'll talk at the end of the presentation. Planning structure. So as part of this process, we developed a steering committee that was formed by Public Works, Traffic Engineer, Emergency Response Services, Fire Department, Police Department, members of the BPAC, even members of Planning Commission were part of it. And that is a requirement. That's the steering committee that leads the discussion or leads the process, and they're heavily involved in the preparation of the action plan itself.
I'll also mention there was one member from the BOC that was on the committee. It was Ray Justice, and then when he lost his election, we just didn't replace it because we were already so far ahead. So our intention at the beginning was to have one of you guys on the committee as well, but it kind of fell through. But just want to mention that.
But yeah, so we had several meetings with the steering committee at the beginning of the process, and then there was a process in the middle where the steering committee provides a lot of guidance on project prioritization and so forth, which I'll mention in a minute. One of the main components of the action plan that needs to be data driven. So we had to rely on the information that we have access through TDOT, through their different platforms, safety platforms, and so forth. So that's where we started. We started by looking at collision data available for the last 5 years. We focus from 2019 to 2023. In the graphic, you'll see the total number of crashes that we're seeing in the last 5 years. So it's about 3,700 crashes that happen on roadways within the city's jurisdiction. We excluded interstates, so TDOT facilities are out of state, but the state routes are included. So in a state route that goes through the city was included, but the interstates were excluded. And out of those 3,700 or so, 10 were fatal crashes and 47 were serious injury. And this program in particular focusing on solving and improving and fixing those two types of crashes, the fatal and the serious injury. So that's really what our recommendations are based on, and a lot of the analysis that was done as part of the process is focusing on fatal and serious injuries. One of the things that we did as we look at through the data, we compare the data within the city to the state. TDOT has a strategic safety highway plan that looks at different contributing factors on really what's causing and what type of crashes are happening. So we compare the city data with the state and look for outliers on things that are either they're significantly higher or higher than the state average. So one, the type of crashes, where they're happening, that mostly happen at intersections within the city. That's not uncommon. That is typical, especially for more urban environments like the city has. So we weren't surprised at that. Two other data points that are worth bringing up is unrestrained occupants. 26.3% of all fatal and serious crashes within the city had unrestrained occupants as a contributing factor, which it was that much higher than the state average, about 7%. So that was one of the things that we are including recommendations for the city and actions of the city. And then senior drivers as well, a little bit higher in the city than the rest of the state or the state average, almost by the same percent, 7%. And we use these contributing factors to focus on our recommendations. One of the other components of the plan is engagement and collaboration. So we did multiple things to get input and feedback from the public and the community. We attended several public events. So we attended the Celebrate Mount Juliet, where I probably saw some of you guys out there. We had a booth. And then we also participated in Halloween in the park. That was an opportunity for us to tell the community what we were doing and then get input. The form where we got most of the input was to use an online survey. So we put together a web page for the projects, and within the web page himself, the public was able to take a look at the data that we were seeing as well, even going as far as even focusing on specific locations if they were interested on the locations with intersections of the higher crash rates or the corridors. So there was a lot of data that was available for them. And then there was a survey that went with that. And even we use our own platform, which is called Public Coordinate, where a member of the community could go and put a specific transportation safety concern specific to a location where they wanted to do it. And that was really helpful for us as we look through holistically, not just the data that we were getting from TDOT and from crash data, but also the public input as well. So during the event, we will pass those cards with a QR code so somebody could go online and give us feedback. So we had a pretty good return on our public involvement, about 760 or so web page page view. And then we had about 636 surveys that were completed. There's a lot of information, pretty good information that we received from the public in terms of their perception on safety within the city, some of the major concerns. So in the bottom left, there's some summary of the recommendations on some of the improvements on how they see safety improving within the city. But there's a lot more data. There's a whole chapter with several pages in the document that has a lot of information from the public on different things that they would like to see. One of the things that we use also to look at the public input for was, so on the left, that's an exhibit that shows what we consider the hotspots for crash data on its own. So we looked at, this is data, this is density based on the number of crashes. And then what we did is we took all the results from the survey, the public survey, and created a different heat map focused on areas where the public and the public comments had concern on specific locations, and then we overlap it on the two. One of the things that we were looking at, that there had to be consistency, and we saw that there was consistency within the city on where the public saw some of the concerns versus what we saw from the data. And that really helped us to narrow down into the recommendations. So now jumping into the recommendations, and I'll show you in a few slides what we did. Eventually, we built what we consider a high injury network. So it's in the city of Mount Juliet, it's about 18 corridors where 80% of all the fatal and serious injuries are happening. So that gives us an opportunity for us to focus on, narrow down the corridors that we need to focus for in terms of countermeasures and recommendations. But in addition to those countermeasures, those are what we consider engineering countermeasures, actually project-specific countermeasures on a corridor. We looked at, as part of the process too, we had to look at existing policies, existing documents that the city has, and then provide recommendations on policy changes and action changes that the city should take. So, and I mentioned earlier, if you remember, I mentioned that when it comes to comparing the data from the city to the state average, unrestrained occupants was one of the contributing factors that was higher than the state. So we provided recommendations that the city should take in order to mitigate some of that data that was seen. And this was vetted through the steering committee. Members of the police department and fire department were also involved in drafting these recommendations, and we make edits based on their feedback. But as an example, continue conducting high visibility enforcement, promote proper child restraint use, conduct social media campaigns, enforce child passenger restraint, etc. One of the things that is interesting, and it was mentioned during one of the meetings with the steering committee, is that the penalty for not using the seatbelt is based on a vehicle code or the Title 15, 16 within the municipal code in Tennessee. It's like $20. So one of the things that we're seeing is there's a need, even statewide, to potentially increase the penalty for not using the seatbelt, because that's what we're seeing through the data across the state. 26% or more is unrestrained occupants who was causing these fatalities. That seems like a low-hanging fruit on things that could be fixed within the state. So then the other data that we saw that it was I mentioned earlier, as it compared to the state, was older drivers. So we do have recommendations as well in terms of, yeah, go ahead.
Just got a quick question. Yeah. So if you can go back to that other slide. So you're saying 15 crashes, that's a 26%. Now, is that, because I know that you had also talked back, I think it was like the fourth or fifth slide back, but if we start looking at this, is that adults or is that children or what is it? Do we know the data?
We do not know the data. This is the 15 crashes include both. But we could go down and break down on whether or not those are the drivers. These are passenger or driver. So it's somebody that is in the vehicle. So in some cases it's the child, in some cases the passenger.
Yeah. I'm just trying to figure this out because, again, I think about all the vehicles that we have driving through our city every day. Yeah. And 15, to be able to say it's 26.3%. Well, that's 26.3% of all total crashes that are fatal or
fatal and serious crashes.
Fatal and serious.
Right. So those are about 57 or so that happened in the last 5 years.
So we've had 57 crashes in our city.
57 fatal or serious injury crashes. So the total number was about 37.
Can you go back to that slide? Because again, I'm all about numbers, especially if our citizens are sitting there thinking about this. Because I also think about how safe is our streets, right? Are we doing a good enough job where we are? And again, I'm just trying to see what the data shows
Yeah.
here.
That's a great question. So this is the total numbers. So in the last 5 years, and I should clarify.
And this is only for our city, correct?
This is only within the city. Now, this includes state routes. So, and the reason why I bring that up is because the state routes, public works is harder for them to implement countermeasures within the state route because they have to work through TDOT. But the state, we included state routes because a lot of the crashes are happening in state routes, so there's a need for partnership. But we excluded the interstates, right? So the I-40 and so forth.
Sure.
So within that, we saw about 3,700 crashes, total crashes that were reported in the data. And when I say the last 5 years, when we started that, we had data through 2023. So we went through 2019, 2023. Right now, the 2024 data is becoming available, so we're going to be looking at that. But for the 5 years that we had the data at the time, there's a total of 3688, something like that. So about 37 total crashes. And out of that, there was 57, 10 that were fatal crashes, and then 47 that they're serious injury crashes. And serious injury crashes is defined as a life-changing event, right? So it's disability So when we say what are the contributing factors, we looked at the percentage of those 47, because that's what we are focusing on eliminating or reducing, right?
And in that one slide where you did a more detailed breakdown, that one right there.
Yeah.
Is there anything in there? Again, I'm thinking about distractions. Is there one in there for distractions? Do we know if this, distractive drivers right there. So we only have 3 is what you have right there?
That 3 of those, of the total 3 of the 57 had as a contributing factor distracting driving. And this is coming from police reports and the data that we have access to.
Okay.
Clarify. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
So on your fatal crashes, though, that's showing 80% of those were from unrestrained occupants.
8 out of 10, right.
So it's possible that we could eliminate that if they just either used a restraint. There's been an ad campaign running consistently since the 80s on.
Right.
Do we have numbers on how many of these happen just on city streets versus once you take the state route component out of it? Because the heat map, it looked like from the heat map, I saw maybe 2 areas that were just city streets with no state route component.
Right.
Yeah, it looks like 2 areas there, Golden Bear and then the other side of the interstate.
Yes. The majority of these crashes are happening on state routes. Yeah. So we do have the data. We didn't separate the data on the table between city-owned and state routes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can get you that if you want it.
I'd like to see it.
Commissioner's got a question.
Oh, Commissioner Mullally.
26% were not wearing seatbelts.
Correct.
Okay.
And that is higher than the state average by a percentage.
So the green rows in that table are the ones where higher than the state average on that table. So
Right.
the green rows.
I'm sorry. So we go back to, there was 15 restraints total that were fatalities or life-changing. But then do we have any data of how many tickets that we write up that are, for people that are not writing or not having their restraints on? Is there any type of data there that we're collecting?
I'm sure the police department keeps over that.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to be able to at least know where our baseline is, right?
Right.
Are we doing a good job, with our first responders to be able to help get the message out? We got a PIO officer, we've got, all of these other different options, like with our parks, we're always putting out the campaigns. And just like the mayor had said, this has been an ongoing since the 80s.
Right.
I mean, I remember that as a kid that,
Right.
that life changing of having to put that strap on. So,
Mhm.
it makes sense to put the seatbelt on. So,
Yeah, and that's our recommendations in the report is for PD to increase the enforcement on the restraint violations.
So is there any concern with the grants, with the new administration? Is this going to be something that, that if we approve that we may be getting on, like the Doge, exactly, may end up cutting this out? Or has there been any concerns there or discussion?
They haven't made a decision yet, but they'll likely just revise the program to fit the Trump administration policies.
Okay.
We don't have an answer on that yet. So they could get away or do away with the program altogether, or
Sure.
they can revise it to take out a lot of the.
So what are we
Previous
asking for?
management.
Like, how much are we asking as a city for, for this program coming into this? You said 2025, or, this next run is what you were saying?
Yeah.
This next phase, I guess, of the federal grant?
implementation, the program or the grant program. Yeah, we haven't, or the city, and Matthew, maybe you want to answer that, but.
Yeah.
And I'll answer from.
Once we get through all
perspective.
the list of projects and things, we can talk through that. But we'll need to identify our top priority project to go after, and then apply for
Oh,
a
okay.
grant.
I see what
for
you're
that.
saying now. Okay.
The
Is it
grant
me-
right now just covers their services to put this report together.
I understand. Okay.
To implement a project, we'll have to apply for another grant.
And the program
Yeah.
is an 80-20, meaning 80 being funded by the federal government with a 20% match. So as we have a list of recommendations, and the next step will be for the city to look through the recommendations, look at the budget, look at and there's different ways to go at it. There's some countermeasures that and I'll show you in a minute, they're considered kind of long-term because of the cost. And there's some that are like short-term, they should be implemented right away, that the city could choose to, let's get all the short-terms done first, figure out where the cost of that is, figure out how much the match needs to be, make recommendations, and then move forward. So,
Commissioner
Okay.
Giles, you have a question?
Yeah, I would like a copy of this safety analysis because that's not in this presentation that I know of. I'd like
Yeah.
a copy of that. I also,
The report?
yeah,
Yeah.
you're going to give one of those to everybody.
Yeah, after this, you're each going to
understand.
get one of these,
Okay.
and you'll have about a month. We're planning to have this adopted in the second meeting in April, so you'll have plenty of time to review it and then send me comments that you want to have addressed.
Okay,
You'll get the full report after
I
this.
understand.
yeah, and so in addition to those are the contributing factors, there's also recommendations for just policy changes or updates. And then even in there, we looked at, like, for instance, this is short-term recommendations that we're suggesting and putting on the plan. They're midterms and then long-term recommendations. And in addition to the recommendation himself, within the tables himself for the information is also which department within the agency will be responsible for doing that. One that I want to highlight is, which we've been doing safety action plans in a lot of different places throughout the state, and we've seen this being one of the most effective ways for an agency to tackle what we were talking about, and it's the establishment of a safety team. And really, that safety team, it becomes almost like an extension of the steering committee that we talked about, where you have public works, traffic engineers, emergency response services, fire department, police department, to come together on a regular basis. And that regular basis could be on a quarterly basis, twice a year, but regularly, and to look at the data and start talking about asking those same questions. Are we enforcing unrestrained occupants? What is the data shows, right? How can we partner with school districts and other things? And we see that as kind of the starting point of making progress towards, reducing and eliminating these fatal and severe injuries, because there's a multifaceted, multi-layer issue, right, when it comes to transportation safety. So the fact that those that are responsible for making changes within their own disciplines are helping each other and bringing up data and responsibility, that's one of the most effective things that we've seen. So we even made it as a long term. It's really, in some ways you have the safety team already established because it's a steering committee. It's just a matter of fact, like in 6 months, get together again and see how the actions are being implemented or not. So anyways. And one other one that we see as very important and also recommendation is transportation impact studies, traffic impact studies, having a safety element within transportation impact studies, which I believe the city does, and then have clarity on developers on how they can start improving, especially now that the high injury network has been identified where the majority of the crashes are happening. If a development project comes in with demonstrate additional traffic in one of these high injury networks, there's data that could help them identify what are some potential project improvements that they can make to help the city establish a safer transportation system. So, So we talked a little bit before about the high injury network. This is the 18 corridors that were identified as part of the high injury network. And again, about 80% of all fatal and serious crashes happen throughout this network, this system of 18 corridors. I think the mayor mentioned that the majority are state routes. He's correct. There's a few that are not, but the majority are state routes. One of the exercises that we did with the steering committee was the prioritization of projects. So we have recommendations for all 18 corridors, and I'll show you a little bit what that looks like. But part of one of the elements of the action plan is to help the city determine how these projects will be prioritized. So what we did is we did an exercise of looking at 6 different factors that could impact and could help weight this project prioritization. So we looked at corridors where fatal and serious injuries are happening, specific corridors, where the crashes for the most vulnerable users. So those will be the pedestrian and bicyclists. Segment crash rates. So this is just looking at all crash rates. So not focusing on fatal and serious injury only, but looking at crash rates as a whole. We also look at a risk index. We use a Safe Street Planner. It's a platform for a third-party vendor. It's called Replica, that gives us information through cell phone use and other data. Which corridors we see more speeding, abrupt braking, distracted driving, and that gives a risk factor to the corridor that then we can use as to evaluate as part of the high injury network as well. So we use that as one of the components. And then we looked at equity and vulnerable community travelers as well. When this program was established, there was a big emphasis on equity. That is one of the elements that we see changing with the new administration. I believe somebody asked, how is the program going to be updated? That will be one of the things that we know for a fact that it will be eliminated from the plan. So we're waiting for now the call for projects. What are the requirements going to be? My response to that, though, is because of when these projects were funded or the grant application was funded, based on those requirements, those elements need to be included. So I wouldn't recommend to exclude those elements, but therefore you should got to take into account when the call for project comes out, how that data needs to be used or not. So, but based on that, we did an average of the steering committee votes and determined that 35% of the points on the prioritization process will be on fatal and serious injury, 10 for vulnerable road users, 15 for crash rates, and so forth, 20, 10, and 10. So based on that ranking or that criteria, we then ranked all the 18 corridors and develop point systems for the city to know, based on that prioritization process, which would be the projects that should be tackled and in which order. Now, if the city has a discretion to, as an example, if the first project is a state route project and the city wants to tackle countermeasures or engineering projects on city-owned facilities, they don't have to be limited to follow this order, right? This is an order that goes established in the safety action plan based on that point prioritization, but it doesn't limit the city's ability to go after funding for any other projects so the city desire. Some of these might be projects that TDOT is already working on, therefore the city will not be tackling some of those projects. That's an example. So then what you will see in the plan, on the draft plan, you'll see in the appendix, there's 18 fact sheets. So there's a fact sheet showing recommendation for each of the project corridors. The fact sheet will have 2 pages. The first page is known information. This is things that we know about the corridor, characteristics of the corridor, the amount of vehicles per day, the speeds, ownership. There's a graphic there showing the type of crashes, the contributor factors, community input specific to those corridors, and also the ranking index based on, for instance, this is the number 1 corridor based on the prioritization process that we mentioned. What make that project become number 1? Well, high on fatal and serious injuries, high in crash rates and so forth. The way that go ahead.
Sorry,
Yeah.
just kind of thinking outside the box here, since this is, again, a very high traffic area and there's been some discussions for the bypass. Is this something that we can help fund some of that to be able to help mitigate some of the traffic, or is this something that wouldn't be aligned with?
Talking about bypass, Central Pike interchange, which is
Yeah.
expected to reduce traffic in this corridor.
Yeah, but not from Pleasant Grove to Old Lebanon Road.
I
That's-
wouldn't think, because that project's not along this corridor. It's,
Mhm.
it's a totally separate corridor, although it does reduce the amount of traffic through here.
That's what I'm
But
looking at. So if it can help mitigate some of the traffic,
as far as safety fines, I don't think that would be eligible to apply for. A
I'm just
project that's
asking,
not yet-
trying to think outside the box,
Yeah.
because again, if we've got more traffic in that area and we can't eliminate the traffic because we don't have any alternatives, if we
Yeah.
have an alternative, you can be able to help offset the cost.
About a third of that's 35-mile-an-hour speed zone too.
Yeah, one of the things that it'd be a stretch. I would say this for a comparative grant, it would be a little bit of a stretch. And number one, it would have to be included as a recommendation. But the counter of that is, I think there's sometimes the perception that least amount of traffic, there's a relationship, less traffic, safer routes, or safer corridors. And sometimes we see the opposite. And the reason is because the fatal and serious crashes, one of the major correlation is speeds. And sometimes less vehicles in the road shows higher increase on the speed, that therefore the severity of the crashes is higher. So there's a not necessarily direct nexus between the two.
The crash rate may go down, but the speeds
severity-
may go up, which the
Yeah,
severity
the
then
severity.
the crash may go up.
So, no, it's I thought it's a creative way to look at
Yeah.
how, and we were trying to figure that out, right? What are things that the city could benefit from? For instance, one of the things that we see a nexus that sometimes is not evident is payment conditions, right? So a lot of the agencies are using some of this funding to go after either a payment management plan or actually some resurfacing for their corridors. And it's not necessarily, the grant is not necessary to improve the payment, but improve the striping or add some other components of it that requires the payment improvement. But there is a nexus between payment conditions and safety. And if you look at the public input, one of the three major contributing factors to safety from the public's perspective is the payment conditions. So there's a direct nexus about improving safety by improving the payment conditions, right? So that would be something that we see a lot of agencies using this program for that. So the second page of the fact sheet is where the recommendations are, and we set the fact sheets and the format of this to help and make it easy for the city to go after implementation dollars. So one of the things that we did as part of that is obviously the recommendation that is consistent with the Federal Highway Administration countermeasures, approved countermeasures. For the cost piece, instead of having a specific cost, we put more like the Yelp kind of the criteria and ranking that goes for restaurants, right? Ranges. So that allows the agency to say, okay, this is a high cost, low cost, middle cost. And if the agency decides to go after funding, then a more detailed cost estimate is prepared for it. And the schedule also, we brought in short-term, long-term recommendations, and then project readiness, whether it requires utility relocation and right-of-way. So there's, like we mentioned, and then the benefit summary, which is going to be needed for grant application. Both the cost and the benefit needs to be summarized in a grant application. So we want to have all that information easily accessible for the city as the city decides to go after implementation dollars. So when you get a draft of the safety action plan, you have an opportunity to go through all 18 corridors with that format. So this is going back to the beginning. If you remember, one of the first slides had to do with leadership commitment and goal setting. This is an important piece of the safety action plan. But by the program itself, it requires the city leadership to make a resolution towards goals for the city. So we met with the steering committee. We have a recommendation to present, but I want to show you a couple of data points right here. The exhibit on the left shows the fatal crash rates and the trend of those crash rates as you compare year after year. What we did for that, we looked at the rolling average. So those numbers are not specific to that 1 year, but they're specific to that year and 4 years prior to it. And the way we did that, just to normalize the trend. So if you have a year that is abnormally higher for whatever reason, that it doesn't affect the trend significantly. And then the other thing is we normalize it by looking at vehicle miles travels. So in that way, as the population, as the growth, and there's more traffic or growth in the city, that we have a way to normalize the data and compare year after year. So you see the trend for fatal crashes is in an incline, slight incline, and it's pretty much the same incline for serious crashes, severe crashes within the city. So the plan himself or the program himself required that the city makes a commitment towards eventually eliminate serious injuries and fatal crashes. Which a lot of agencies, we shouldn't say a lot of agencies. Prior to this program, a lot of agencies were doing plans, what they call the Vision Zeros. How long will they get to a zero fatal and serious injuries? As part of those programs, a lot of agencies, and I said like City of Knoxville, City of Nashville, have made a commitment to get there by year 2050, 2060. This program is a little bit different. It doesn't require that level of commitment. What it does, it requires some aggressive goal that the city can commit to maintain or attempt to reach, with the intent to get eventually to zero, right? So that I think we found it to be more acceptable for most agencies because it's realistic, it's achievable, it's something that the agency can commit to. We also model what TDOT's done as part of their goal for the strategic safety plan, and TDOT's goal went away from being like, okay, we're going to get to zero versus we're going to be better than the projected trend. So how much better can we be from the projected trend? So if the trend says this is the direction we're going, let's start reducing and making those rates lower than what it would have been otherwise. So with that in mind, the recommendation from the steering committee was that the city should contemplate a commitment towards making progress towards the long-term goal of zero, right, for traffic deaths and serious injuries, but have an interim goal of 25% reduction in fatal and serious injury crashes by year 2035. Year 2035 is about 10 years from now. In 10 years, we think it's a reasonable window of time for the city to be able to implement some of these projects, both the engineering as well as the actions. And then increase that percent reduction to 55% by year 2045. So by year 2045, the crash rate would be less than what it is today. So that's the projection of what percentage of reduction of those rates and that trend of rates is needed to be better than today in terms of crash rates. So that was a recommendation, and if you all agree, that will be as part of the completion of the project, there will be a resolution with that commitment. I'll stop there because I'm sure there's probably some questions.
We have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
So I don't know if there's any
I think
questions
that's one
from
of
the
last
board.
slides. So yeah, if y'all have any
I think that's
questions on that.
So if I have any more questions, Matt, do I just reach out to you and you
Yeah.
can be able to go back and forth?
Yeah.
Okay.
Once you review this, reach out, email me with any questions you have or comments.
I've got about 10 of them up here, but since we're short on time,
Yeah.
I'll reach out to you tomorrow so we can go through this line by line with me.
Okay.
So appreciate your time today,
Yeah,
sir.
of
And,
course.
and thank you to the rest of the team that's here tonight. Appreciate you.
Thank you. All right, just to finish, just so you know where we're heading. So today was this presentation. Our goal is to submit the final draft. So this is the draft, the final version of the draft by the 10th of April. We will do another presentation similar to this on the Planning Commission on the 17th, and then the goal will be for adoption on the 21st of April. And the timing for that, we are aware that the call for projects, we expect it to be coming out in a few weeks, and it will require the adoption before those projects can be implemented or go after the implementation fund. So.
So with this campaign of getting the message out, obviously we've done this. You guys said this is the third phase. Is that correct? Or is this the second phase?
Cycle. This is the third cycle.
Third
there's-
cycle.
Of the
there's
grant
5 year
program.
of the grant of the program.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we've been doing this for how many years now?
We just started last year.
Oh, we did just
We
start
didn't-
last year.
Yeah, the Safe Streets for All grant program has been going on for 3 years. We
Correct.
applied in year 2 to do this plan so that we can apply in year 4 and 5.
Okay,
for
I see now.
implementation
Okay.
dollars.
Yeah, because I remember us talking about this program and certain things we were doing, to help better our streets. So,
Yeah.
okay, that makes more sense. Thank you for clearing that.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks. And we are adjourned.